It's a regular day at the hospital when a blonde woman comes into the burn ward with both of her ears burnt. The doctor in charge had never seen an injury quite like it. "How did you get both sides burnt like that?" he asked her. She says, "Well, when I was ironing my work suit the phone rang and I mistakenly picked up the iron instead of the phone." "Well, that explains one ear," said the doctor, his eyebrows raised as high as they can get. "But what about the other ear?" "Well, I had to call an ambulance, didn't I?"
There was a man named Ray Berkowitz, and he was at work when his wife called in panic. She was ready to give birth. He hurried to the hospital as quickly as he could, marveling that his son, Charles, is about to be born. One day while Ray was out of town for work, he got a call from his wife that she was going into labor. He rushed back but didn't make it before she gave birth, and she called him to tell him it was a healthy baby boy. He drove all night and all day and finally made it to the hospital. He was so excited he rushed straight to the maternity ward and to the nursery where he found a big glass room with a big sign above the door, "Beautiful babies." Excitedly he rushed in, "I want to see my son." The nurse asked for the name. "Charles Berkowitz." The nurse looked at the list and said, "Sorry sir, your kid isn't here, try the next nursery down the hall." Perplexed, Ray walked down the hall to another big glass room with another big sign, "Beautiful babies." "All right, my son will have a pretty easy life looking handsome," he thought and walked in. "I want to see my son. Name, please." "Charles Berkowitz." The nurse looks over her list and says, "Sorry sir, not here, try the nursery down the hall." So the man walks down the hall to find another room with a big sign, "Ugly babies." "That's all right," he thought. "Looks don't matter." He walked in smiling and said, "I want to see my son, Charles Berkowitz." The nurse looks over her list and frowns. "Sorry sir, try the next nursery down the hall." Dejected, the man walks down the hall to a room that wasn't glass, that had a smaller sign over the door, "Very ugly babies." It doesn't matter what he looks like, he thinks to himself. "I'll love him no matter what." He walks in. "Please, I want to see my son, Charles Berkowitz." The nurse looks down at her list and shakes her head. "I'm sorry, he's not here. Try the next nursery down the hall." He was getting really worried now. He walks down another long hallway that ends in a single steel door with a little plaque on it that says, "Charles Berkowitz."
For years Frank's knees or elbows would start to ache at 8:50 a.m. and 8:50 p.m. At first he thought nothing of it. He was getting older, and he figured it was all part of aging. After about 5 years Frank got concerned and started seeing doctor after doctor trying to figure out what was causing it. Desperate, he started looking to alternative medicine. No help. He started seeing doctors running pill mills. No help. The pain would come back twice a day every day. At his wits' end he goes and sees a doctor in a filthy clinic. This doctor had been suspended many times, sued and lost every lawsuit, but Frank was losing hope for a diagnosis. Sitting on an exam table in a thin paper exam gown, Frank tells the sleazy doctor, every day at 8:50 I'm in pain. The best doctors in the state cannot figure out what the cause is." The sleazy doctor sitting there in his stained lab coat, filterless cigarette dangling from his mouth, looks up and down at Frank and finally says, "It's simple. You have tendinitis."
And 70-year-old married a 20-year-old. A year after the wedding, the couple arrives at the delivery room. A male boy weighing 3.5 kilograms was born, healthy and beautiful. The nurse asks the old man, "Yours?" "Yes," the old man replies proudly. "Congratulations," the nurse replies. "Well," says the old man, "the old engine still runs." 2 years later the duo arrives at the delivery room again. A 3.5 kilograms girl was born, healthy and beautiful. The nurse asks the old man, "Yours?" "Yes," the old man answers. "Well done," the nurse answers. The engine still runs, said the old man. After 2 more years, they come to the delivery room again. A 3.5-year-old male son is born, healthy and beautiful. The nurse asks the old man, yours? Yes, the old man replies. Congratulations, the nurse says, that's really impressive. Well, says the old man, the engine is still running. Well, says the nurse, you may want to change the oil, the last one came out black.
I've heard some people are really going crazy from isolation. I'm glad I'm not one of those. I've just been talking about this with the microwave and toaster while drinking coffee, and all of us agreed that things are getting bad. I didn't mention anything to the washing machine as she puts a different spin on everything. Certainly not to the fridge as he is acting cold and distant. The sink just said everything is going down the drain. In the end the iron calmed me down as she said everything will be fine, the situation isn't that pressing. The vacuum was very unsympathetic. Told me to just suck it up, but the fan was more optimistic and felt it would all soon blow over. The toilet looked a bit flushed when I asked its opinion, and it didn't say anything, but the doorknob told me to get a grip. The front door said I was unhinged, and then the curtains told me to pull myself together.
A man went to the doctor. He said, "Doc, you gotta check my leg. Something's wrong. Just put your ear up to my thigh, you'll hear it." The doctor cautiously placed his ear to the man's thigh only to hear, "Gimme $20, I really need $20. I've never seen or heard anything like this before, how long has this been going on?" The doctor asked. "That's nothing, document, put your ear to my knee." The doctor put his ear to the man's knee and heard it say, "Man, I really need $10, just lend me $10. Sir, I really don't know what to tell you. I've never seen anything like this." The doctor was dumbfounded. "Wait, doc, that's not it. There's more, just put your ear up to my ankle," the man urged him. The doctor did as the man said and was blown away to hear his ankle plead, "Please, I just need $5. Lend me $5 please if you can." "I have no idea what to tell you," the doctor said. "There's nothing about it in my books," he said as he frantically searched all his medical reference books. "I can make a well-educated guess though. Based on life and all my previous experience, I can tell you that your leg appears to be broke in 3 places."
A blonde woman came in for a routine physical at the doctor's office. "There you go," said the nurse as she handed her a urine cup. "The bathroom is over there on your left. The doctor will see you in a few minutes." A few minutes later the lady came out of the bathroom. She hands an empty container back to the nurse. With a relieved look on her face she says, "Thank you. But they had a toilet in there, so I didn't need this after all."
While in China, an American single man acts promiscuous and does not use protection the entire time he is there. A week after arriving back home in the States, he wakes one morning to find his swimsuit area covered with bright green and purple spots. Horrified, he immediately goes to see a doctor. The doctor, never having seen anything like this before, orders some tests and tells the man to return in 2 days for the results. After 2 days, the doctor tells him, "I've got bad news for you, you have contracted Mongolian VD. It's very rare and almost unheard of here in the US. We know very little about it." The man perplexed asks, "Well, can't you give me a shot or something to fix me up, doc?" The doctor answers, "I'm sorry, there's no known cure. We are going to have to amputate." "Wait. What?" The man screams in horror, "Absolutely not. I want a second opinion." The doctor replies, "Well, it's your choice. Go ahead if you want, but surgery is your only option." The man shops around, going to many doctors and experts, but they all tell him the same, they must remove the organ. At some point a friend tells him, "You contracted this in China, right? Then why not go to a Chinese doctor?" The man, having not thought of that, seeks out a Chinese doctor in the hopes he'll know more about the disease. The Chinese doctor examines the problematic area and proclaims, "Ah, yes, Mongolian VD. Very rare disease." The guy says to the doctor, Yeah, I already know that, but what can we do? My American doctor wants to cut off my organ. The Chinese doctor shakes his head and laughs. Stupid American doctors always want operate, make more money that way. No need to amputate. Oh, thank God. The man exclaims, Yes, says the Chinese doctor. Wait 2 weeks. Fall off by itself.
Two attorneys boarded a flight out of Seattle. One sat in the window seat, the other sat in the middle seat. Just before takeoff, a physician got on and took the aisle seat next to the two attorneys. The physician kicked off his shoes, wiggled his toes and was settling in when the attorney in the window seat said, I think I'll get up and get a Coke. No problem, said the physician. I'll get it for you. While he was gone, one of the attorneys picked up the physician's shoe and spat in it. When he returned with the Coke, the other attorney said, That looks good, I think I'll have one too. Again, the physician obligingly went to fetch it, and while he was gone, the other attorney picked up the other shoe and spat in it. The physician returned and they all sat back and enjoyed the flight. As the plane was landing, the physician slipped his feet into his shoes and knew immediately what had happened. How long must this go on? He asked. This fighting between our professions? This hatred? This animosity? This spitting in shoes and pissing in Cokes?
A woman went into a doctor's office with a baby. She's taken into an examining room and waits for the doctor. The doctor examines the baby and finds him not gaining much weight and asks the woman, Is he breastfed or on the bottle? Oh, he is breastfed, replied the woman. Well then, strip down to your waist, orders the doctor. She takes off her top and bra and sits on the examining table. The doc starts pressing, kneading and pinching both breasts for quite a while in a very detailed and thorough examination. After a few minutes of this, the doctor motions to her to get dressed, then he says, No wonder this baby is so hungry. You don't have any milk. The woman responds with a wry grin, Well, of course I don't. Why is that? Asks the doctor in surprise. Well, I'm his aunt, but I'm sure glad I brought him in today.
It was early morning and an old man in his 80s got up and was putting on his coat. His wife said, Where are you going? He said, I'm going to the doctor. And she said, Why, are you sick? No, he said, I'm going to get me some of those new Viagra pills. So his wife got up out of her rocker and was putting on her sweater, and he said, Where are you going? She said, I'm going to the doctor too. Why? She said, If you're going to start using that rusty old thing again, then I'm going to get a tetanus shot.
A mother and her teen daughter arrive at the doctor's office. The doctor says, Okay, what seems to be the problem? The mother says, It's my daughter Susie. She keeps getting these cravings, she's putting on weight and is sick most mornings. The doctor gives Susie a good examination and then turns to the mother and says, Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but Susie is pregnant. About 3 months would be my guess. The mother says, Pregnant. She can't be, she has never ever been left alone with a man. Have you, Susie? Susie says, No, Mom. I've never even kissed a man. The doctor walks over to the window and just stares out of it. A few moments later, the mother says, Is there something wrong out there, doctor? The doctor replies, No, not really. It's just that the last time something like this happened, a star appeared in the east and 3 wise men came over the hill. I'll be darned if I'm going to miss it this time.
a man returns from a foreign holiday and is feeling very ill. He goes to see his doctor, and is immediately rushed to the hospital to undergo tests. The man wakes up after the tests in a private room at the hospital, and the phone by his bed rings. "This is your doctor. We've had the results back from your tests, and we've found you have an extremely nasty STD called GSH. It's a combination of gonorrhea, AIDS, syphilis, and herpes." "Oh my gosh!" cried the man. "What are you going to do, doctor?" "Well, we're going to put you on a diet of pizzas, pancakes, and pita bread." "Will that cure me?" asked the man. "Well, no," the doctor replied. "But it's the only food we can get under the door."
Two doctors, Dean and Gable, are treating a man with lung disease. They're explaining how his smoking weed has led to his condition worsening. "But it's just herbal," the patient protested. "How can it be bad?" Dr. Jenkins sighed. "Nature isn't all innocent. Apricot stones contain lethal amounts of cyanide. There is a certain plant in my back garden, if you sit under it for just 5 minutes, you will die. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe for you." The man seemed to accept that, and promised to stop his smoking. After he left, the doctors went to lunch. As they were sitting down to eat, Dr. Smith asked, "Oh, by the way, what is that plant that kills you if you sit under it?" "A water lily."
A man is strolling past the mental hospital and suddenly remembers an important meeting. Unfortunately, his watch has stopped, and he cannot tell if he is late or not. Then, he notices a patient similarly strolling about within the hospital fence. Calling out to the patient, the man says, "Pardon me, sir, but do you have the time?" The patient calls back, "1 moment," and throws himself upon the ground, pulling out a short stick as he does. He pushes the stick into the ground, and pulling out a carpenter's level, assures himself that the stick is vertical. With a compass, the patient locates north and with a steel ruler, measures the precise length of the shadow cast by the stick. Withdrawing a slide rule from his pocket, the patient calculates rapidly, then swiftly packs up all his tools and turns back to the pedestrian, saying, "It is now precisely 3:29 p.m., provided today is August 16th, which I believe it is." The man can't help but be impressed by this demonstration, and sets his watch accordingly. Before he leaves, he says to the patient, "That was really quite remarkable, but tell me, what do you do on a cloudy day, or at night, when the stick casts no shadow?" The patient shrugs and says, "I suppose I'd just look at my watch."
A man sitting at a bar after work shares with the bartender why he is looking so stressed. "I'm not sleeping well. I have nightmares about a monster under my bed and I am too embarrassed to seek help." A patron nearby overhears this and introduces himself. "I overheard your story and I am a psychiatrist. Maybe I can help." The first thing is you recognize these are only dreams, and that is obvious, so I should be able to help you in a few sessions. Here's my card, give me a call. A few weeks pass and the same two are once again at the bar after work. The psychiatrist says to the other guy, "Hi, how goes the nightmares? I never heard from you, so I hope you are doing okay." The other guy says, "Things are great, the bartender helped me." Psychiatrist, "The bartender helped you? You needed a trained professional to help you. What possibly could a bartender do that a psychiatrist couldn't?" The other guy says, "He told me to saw the legs off my bed."
A woman went to her doctor's clinic. She was seen by one of the doctors, but after about 4 minutes in the examination room, she burst out screaming and ran down the hall. One of the younger doctors stopped her and asked what the problem was, and she explained. She had her sit down and relax in another room. The younger doctor marched back to the first and demanded, "What's the matter with you? Mrs. Terry is 63 years old, she has 4 grown children and 7 grandchildren, and you told her she was pregnant? The older doctor smiled as he continued to write on his clipboard. Cured her hiccups though, didn't it?
A woman went to the emergency room, where she was seen by a young new doctor. After about 3 minutes in the examination room, the doctor told her she was pregnant. She burst out of the room and ran down the corridor screaming. An older doctor stopped her and asked what the problem was. After listening to her story, he calmed her down and sat her in another room. Then the doctor marched down the hallway to the first doctor's room. "What wrong with you?" he demanded. "This woman is 80 years old, she has 2 grown children and several grandchildren, and you told her she was pregnant." He new doctor continued to write on his clipboard and without looking up said, "Does she still have the hiccups?"
A old snake goes to see his doctor and says, "I need something for my eyes. I can't see very well these days." The doctor fixes him up with a pair of glasses and tells him to return in 2 weeks. The snake comes back in 2 weeks and tells the doctor that he's very depressed. "What's the problem?" asks the doctor. "Didn't the glasses help you?" "The glasses are fine, doc," answers the snake dejectedly. "Thing is, I just discovered I've been living with a garden hose the past 2 years.
One day, a woman walks into a dentist's office and asks how much it will cost to extract wisdom teeth. $80, the dentist says. "That's a ridiculous amount," the woman says. "Isn't there a cheaper way?" "Well," the dentist says, "if you don't use an anesthetic, I can knock the price down to $60. "That's still too expensive," replies the woman. "Okay," says the dentist. "If I save on anesthesia and simply rip the teeth out with a pair of pliers, I can knock the price down to $20. "Nope," moans the woman, "it's still too much." "Well," says the dentist, scratching his head, "if I let one of my students do it, I suppose I can knock the price down to $10. "Marvelous," says the woman. "May I book my mother-in-law for next Tuesday, please?"
A distraught senior citizen phoned her doctor's office. "Is it true," she wanted to know, "that the medication you prescribe has to be taken for the rest of my life?" "Yes, I'm afraid so," the doctor told her. There was a moment of silence before the senior lady replied, "I'm wondering then, just how serious is my condition because this prescription is marked and no refills."
A man comes running to the doctor shouting and screaming in pain. "Please, doctor, you've got to help me. I've been stung by a bee." "Don't worry," says the doctor, "I'll put some cream on it. You will never find that bee. It must be miles away by now." "No, you don't understand," answers the doctor, "I'll put some cream on the place you were stung." "Oh. It happened in the garden in back of my house." "No, no, no," says the doctor getting frustrated, "I mean, on which part of your body did that bee sting you?" "On my finger," screamed the man in pain. "The bee stung me on my finger and it really hurts." "Which one?" the doctor. "How am I supposed to know? All the bees look the same to me." A man went to the hospital to visit his mother-in-law, who was in serious condition. On the way back, the wife, very worried, asks, "So, honey? How's my mom doing?" He replies, "She looks great. She is in good health. She will still live for many years. Next week she will be released from the hospital and will come and live with us forever." "Wow, that's amazing," says the surprised wife, "but this is very strange, dear. Yesterday she seemed to be on her deathbed. The doctor said she should have a few days to live." "Well, I don't know how she was yesterday," he replied, "but today when I arrived at the hospital, the doctor told me that we should prepare for the worst."
3 new corpses were delivered to the morgue one day, each with a great big smile on his face. The mortification examines each of them, and says who they are and their cause of death. First body Frenchman, age 60, died making love to his mistress, hence the smile on his face. Second body Irishman, age 30, won €1,000 in the lottery, spent it all on whiskey, and died of alcohol poisoning, hence the smile on his face. The inspector then asks, "What about the third body?" The mortician says, This is perhaps the most unlikely of all. Billy Bob, a farm boy from Oklahoma, age 25, struck by lightning. Why is he smiling then? He thought he was getting his picture taken.
Four surgeons were taking a coffee break and were discussing their work. The first said, "I think accountants are the easiest to operate on. You open them up and everything inside is numbered." The second said, "I think librarians are the easiest to operate on. You open them up and everything inside is in alphabetical order." The third said, "I like to operate on electricians. You open them up and everything inside is color-coded." The fourth surgeon said, "I like technicians. They always understand when you have a few parts left over at the end."
A young farm couple, Homer and Darlene, got married and just couldn't seem to get enough lovin'. In the morning, before Homer left the house for the fields, they made love. When Homer came back from the fields, they made love. And again at bedtime, they made love. The problem was their nooner. It took Homer a half hour to travel home and another half hour to return to the fields, and he just wasn't getting enough work done. Finally Homer asked the town doctor what to do. "Homer," said the doctor, "just take your rifle out to the field with you, and when you're in the mood, fire off a shot into the air. That will be Darlene's signal to come out to you. Then you won't lose any field time." They tried Doc's advice, and it worked well for a while. Homer came back to the doctor's office. "What's wrong?" asked the document. "Didn't my idea work?" "Oh, it worked real good," said Homer. "Whenever I was in the mood, I fired off a shot like you said and Darlene come running. We'd find a secluded place, make love, and then she'd go back home again." "Good, Homer. So what's the problem?" asked the document. "I ain't seen her since hunting season started."
A patient who needs a heart transplant suddenly gets a phone call from his surgeon. "You are in luck, we have 2 matching donors. A 20-year-old athlete and an 80-year-old lawyer, which heart do you want?" The patient answers, "Give me the lawyer's heart." "Are you sure?" asks the surgeon in surprise. "Yeah, I'd rather have one that hasn't been used." There are 2 identical twin brothers that live together. One happens to be a well-respected dentist, and the other can't seem to keep a job. Instead of actively looking for work, he likes to sit around at home. One Saturday, the dentist is hungry, and puts his brother on the spot. He tells him to get off his lazy behind and go get them some food. After some protest, the lazy brother takes the car and leaves for the store. In the meantime, the dentist takes a nap on his day off. He turns off his phone so he won't be interrupted. About 30 minutes later, the lazy brother gets into a head-on collision in the intersection by the grocery store. His vital signs are fading, he's unconscious and barely moving. An ambulance picks him up and rushes him to the hospital. He ends up in the emergency room under observation, but his condition is critical. They try calling his dentist brother, but he doesn't pick up because his phone is off. The dentist wakes to a knock on the door. Suspecting a solicitor, he ignores it, but the knocking continues. Eventually, he resolves to get up and yell at the person at the door. When he does, he reveals the Grim Reaper. He is just as he appears in movies, a full skeleton underneath a tattered cloak. The Grim Reaper swears, "Oh no. This always happens with identical twins. What do you mean? Asks the dentist. Well, if you must know, your brother was in a critical car accident, and I've come to take him to the underworld. I'm afraid his time on Earth has ended. I'll take my leave now. The dentist is noticeably upset. He says, wait. Isn't there some way I can challenge you for my brother's life? After all, you made the mistake. Certainly there must be a way I can bargain for his life. The Grim Reaper asks, what do you have in mind? The dentist thinks. How about a challenge? If I beat you, you let my brother go free. The Grim Reaper laughs. I will beat you in any challenge. What challenge do you propose? The dentist smiles. I propose we see who has the cleanest teeth. 5 minutes of brushing each, then we decide. Very well, says the Grim Reaper, who makes his way to the bathroom. Once there, he pulls back his tattered cloak to reveal his skull. It's glistening. He takes a toothbrush from the bathroom, loads it with toothpaste, and brushes. After 5 minutes, the shiniest teeth anyone has ever seen glisten and make the room bright. The Grim Reaper grins. You are foolish human. But, you are entitled to your chance. The dentist takes another toothbrush, loads it with toothpaste, and starts brushing like a madman. When his 5 minutes are up, he spits out the paste. He smiles. It's unbelievable. The shine from the dentist's teeth is so beautiful that he can see the Grim Reaper's reflection in his perfectly clean teeth. The winner is obvious. The Grim Reaper hangs his head in shame. You win, human. This time, your brother will live. He disappears in a puff of smoke. At the same instant, the bedridden brother wakes up in the hospital. Not only is he uninjured, he seems perfectly healthy. Suddenly, the phone by his bed rings. It's his brother, the dentist. He picks up. Hey, bro. You'll never believe what happened. Apparently, I went out to the market and got hit by a car. They say I almost died. The dentist smiles on the phone and says, that's interesting, bro. Today you might say that I also had a brush with death.
A cop stops a car for traveling faster than the posted speed limit. Since he's in a good mood that day, he decides he might give the fellow a break and write him out a warning instead of a ticket. So, he asks the man his name. Fred, the driver replies. Fred what? The officer asks. Just Fred, the man responds. When the officer presses him for a last name, the man tells him that he used to have a last name but lost it. The officer thinks he has a mental case on his hands, but he has a long shift ahead and he's bored, so he goes along with it. Tell me, Fred, how did you lose your last name? The man replies. It's a long story, so stay with me. I was born Fred Dingaling. I know, funny last name. The kids used to tease me all the time. So I stayed to myself. I studied hard and got good grades. When I got older, I realized that I wanted to be a doctor. I went through college, medical school, internship, residency, finally got my degree, so I was Fred Dingaling, MD. After a while I got bored being a doctor, so I decided to go back to school. Dentistry was my dream. Got all the way through school, got my degree, so I was now Fred Dingaling, MD, DDS. Got bored doing dentistry, so I started fooling around with my assistant. She gave me VD. So, I was Fred Dingaling, MD, DDS with VD. Well, the ADA found out about the VD, so they took away my DDS, so I was Fred Dingaling, MD with VD. Then the AMA found out about the ADA taking away my DDS because of the VD, so they took away my MD, leaving me as Fred Dingaling with VD. Then the VD took away my Dingaling. So now, I'm just Fred. The officer walked away in tears, laughing.
There once were twin boys, age 6, that had developed extreme personalities. One was a pessimist and the other a total optimist. Concerned, their parents took them to a psychiatrist. First, the psychiatrist treated the pessimist. Trying to brighten his outlook, the psychiatrist took him to a room filled with toys. But instead of yelping with delight, the little boy burst into tears. "What's the matter?" the psychiatrist asked. "Don't you want to play with any of the toys?" "Yes," the little boy bawled, "but if I did I'd only break them." Next, the psychiatrist treated the optimist. Trying to dampen his outlook, the psychiatrist took him to a room piled to the ceiling with horse manure. But instead of wrinkling his nose in disgust, the optimist climbed to the top of the pile and began gleefully digging out scoop after scoop with his bare hands. "What are you doing?" the baffled psychiatrist asked. The little boy replied, "With all this manure, there must be a pony in here somewhere."
A woman brought a very limp duck to a veterinary surgeon. As she laid her pet on the table, the vet pulled out his stethoscope and listened to the bird's chest. After a moment or two, the vet shook his head sadly and said, "I'm sorry your duck, Cuddles, has passed away." The distressed woman wailed. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I am sure." "Your duck is dead," replied the vet. "How can you be so sure?" she protested. "I mean, you haven't done any testing on him or anything. He might just be in a coma or something." The vet sighed, turned around and left the room. He returned a few minutes later with an old dog. As the duck's owner looked on in amazement, the dog stood on his hind legs, put his front paws on the examination table and sniffed the duck from top to bottom. He then looked up at the vet with sad eyes and shook his head. The vet patted the dog on the head and took it out of the room. A few minutes later he returned with a cat. The cat jumped on the table and also delicately sniffed the bird from head to foot. The cat sat back on its haunches, shook its head, meowed softly and strolled out of the room. The vet looked at the woman and said, "I'm sorry, but as I said, this is most definitely, 100% certifiably, a dead duck." He turned to his computer terminal, hit a few keys and produced a bill, which he handed to the woman. The duck's owner, still in shock, took the bill. $150, she cried. $150 just to tell me my duck is dead? The vet shrugged. "I'm sorry. If you had just taken my word for it, the bill would have been $20. But with the lab report and the CAT scan, it's now $150.
3 doctors with a growing private practice decided they needed to hire a new nurse onto their staff to meet their needs. They hired a very qualified applicant named Beth, and met after a week to discuss the new nurse's abilities in her new role. She does a really good job with the patients, but I'm concerned Beth is mixing things up a bit. I told her that her shift was from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and she showed up at 5 a.m. the next day," said the first doctor. The second doctor chimed in, "I have had some similar issues. I told Beth to tell the patient they needed to take 1 antibiotic every 6 hours, and she told them they needed to take 6 every 1 hour." The third doctor looked shocked. "I have had no issues so far." The 3 heard a blood-curdling scream from the next room over. "Oh," said the third doctor, "I see what you mean. I just asked Beth to prick the boil on the patient in the next room." An old woman took her husband to the doctor. The doctor checked the husband's pulse, then told the woman, "I'm sorry, your husband is dead." The woman was shocked. "I don't believe it. Are you sure?" "I want to be absolutely sure. Are there any other tests you can do?" The doctor responded, "I'm quite sure, but if you'd like we do have some alternative tests that we can perform." "Yes. I have to be absolutely certain." The doctor shrugged, sat down on a stool and yelled out the door, "Send in Mrs. Fluffkins." In walked a black house cat. The cat jumped onto the examination table, walking carelessly on the unresponsive body of the woman's husband. The cat swatted at the man's face a few times, then jumped off the table, meowed twice, and walked out of the room. "Just as I thought," said the doctor. "Dead. Send in Walter." In walked a Labrador retriever. The dog walked over to the woman's husband, smelled his hand which was dangling from the table. The dog turned to the doctor, his big expressive eyes raised up to meet the doctor's gaze. Then the dog shook his head and walked out of the room. "Just as I thought," said the doctor. "Dead. Send in Colin." Suddenly a towering Aussie in safari gear burst into the room. A pair of binoculars hung from a strap around his neck. He pulled them up to his eyes, looked at the husband for a second, then turned to the old woman and yelled, "Oybihya, husband's foo in dead," and walked out of the room. "Thank you, Colin," said the doctor, making a note on his clipboard, then yelled down the hall, "Ma'am, can you come in here?" An elderly woman walked slowly into the room, peered through her thick glasses at the body of the husband on the exam table, shook her head, then sat down at a typewriter in the corner, clacked away at the keys for a few seconds. Ding. She pulled a card out of the typewriter and handed it to the doctor. The doctor looked at the card, dead. "Thank you, ma'am, that'll be all." The doctor suddenly hopped up from his stool. He picked the stool up by the legs and swung it over his head, crashing the seat down on the body of the husband. The husband's lifeless body flailed under the impact, then settled back to rest on the table. The doctor set the stool down, then jotted something on his clipboard. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband is definitely dead." He handed her a piece of paper detailing the test results. "Take this to the front desk and they'll check you out." The old woman took the slip of paper to the front desk. The receptionist looked it over, and giving the old woman a sad look said, "I'm sorry for your loss. That will be $32,000. $32,000? That can't possibly be right, I've never paid that much to see the doctor." The receptionist looked over the paper again. "Well, it's $100 copay for the doctor's visit, but then it shows you also requested a CAT scan, a lab report, a colonoscopy, a mammogram, and a stool analysis." Morris, an 82-year-old man, went to the doctor to get a physical. A few days later, the doctor saw Morris walking down the street with a gorgeous young woman on his arm. A couple of days later, the doctor spoke to Morris and said, "Hey, Morris, saw you the other day. You seem to be doing great." Morris replied, "Just doing what you said, document, get a hot mama, and be cheerful." The doctor sighed, "I didn't say that, Morris. I said, you've got a heart murmur, be careful."
A doctor at an insane asylum decided to take his patients to a baseball game. For weeks in advance, he coached his patients to respond to his commands. When the day of the game arrived, everything went quite well. As the national anthem started, the doctor yelled, "Up nuts," and the patients complied by standing up. After the anthem, he yelled, "Down nuts," and they all sat back down in their seats. After a home run was hit, the doctor yelled, "Cheer nuts." They all broke out into applause and cheered. When the umpire made a particularly bad call against the star of the home team, the doctor yelled, "Bunuts," and they all started booing and catcalling. Comfortable with their response, the doctor decided to go get a beer and a hot dog, leaving his assistant in charge. When he returned, there was a riot in progress. Finding his missing assistant, the doctor asked, "What in the world happened?" The assistant replied, "Well, everything was going just fine until this guy walked by and yelled, 'Peanuts.'"
One night a man and a woman are both at a bar knocking back a few beers. They start talking and come to realize that they're both doctors. After about an hour, the man says to the woman, "Hey, how about if we sleep together tonight? No strings attached. It'll just be one night of fun." The woman doctor agrees to it. So they go back to her place and he goes in the bedroom. She goes in the bathroom and starts scrubbing up like she's about to go into the operating room. She scrubs for a good 10 minutes. Finally she goes in the bedroom and they have love for an hour or so. Afterwards, the man says to the woman, "You're a surgeon, aren't you?" "Yeah." "How did you know?" The man says, "I could tell by the way you scrubbed up before we started." "Oh, that makes sense," says the woman. "You're an anesthesiologist, aren't you?" "Yeah," says the man, a bit surprised. "How did you know?" "Because I didn't feel a thing."
The nurse asked the patient to remove his clothing and put on a gown to be checked by the doctor. "In front of you?" he asked shyly. The nurse says, "Well, no, but I've seen a naked human body before." The man said, "Not one like mine. You'd die laughing at my naked body." "Of course I won't laugh," said the nurse to the patient. "I'm a professional. In over 20 years I've never laughed at a patient." "Okay then," said the patient, and he proceeded to drop his trousers, revealing a huge male body with the smallest adult male organ the nurse had ever seen in her life. In length and girth, it was almost identical to an AAA battery. Unable to control herself, the nurse tried to stop a giggle, but it just came out. And then she started laughing at the fact that she was laughing. Feeling very bad that she had laughed at the man's private parts, she composed herself as well as she could. "I am so sorry," she said. "I don't know what came over me. On my honor as a nurse and a lady, I promise that it won't happen again. Now tell me, what seems to be the problem?" "It's swollen," Bob replied. She ran out of the room.
Two men are in a lunatic asylum and one night, they decide they don't like living in an asylum anymore. They decide they're going to escape. They get up onto the roof, and there, just across this narrow gap, they see the rooftops of the town, stretching away in the moonlight to freedom. The first man jumps right across with no problem. But his friend didn't dare make the leap, afraid of falling. So then, the first man has an idea. He says, "Hey, I have my flashlight with me. I'll shine it across the gap between the buildings. You can walk along the beam and join me." The second man immediately spots the problem with this and shakes his head. "What do you think I am? Crazy? You'd turn it off when I was halfway across."
90-year-old George went for his annual physical. All of his tests came back with normal results. Dr. Don said, "George, everything looks great physically. How are you doing mentally and emotionally? Are you at peace with yourself, and do you have a good relationship with your God?" George replied, "God and me are tight. He knows I have poor eyesight, so he's fixed it so that when I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, poof, the light goes on when I pee, and then, poof, the light goes off when I'm done." "Wow," commented Dr. Darns. "That's incredible." A little later in the day, Dr. Darns called George's wife. "Thelma," he said, "George is just fine. Physically he's great. But I had to call because I'm in awe of his relationship with God. Is it true that he gets up during the night and poof, the light goes on in the bathroom, and then poof, the light goes off?" Thelma exclaimed. "That old fool! He's been peeing in the refrigerator again."
There was once a very prim and proper older lady who had a problem with passing gas. Since she came from a generation when people didn't even talk about this kind of problem, it took a long time for her to seek help. Finally, however, she was persuaded to consult her family doctor. After she filled out all the proper forms and had waited about 20 minutes in the waiting room, the doctor called her into her office, leaned back in her chair, folded her hands into a steeple and asked her how she could help. "Doctor," she said, "I have a very bad gas problem. Yesterday afternoon I had lunch with the Secretary of State and his wife and had 6 Ah. Silent gas emissions. Last night, I had dinner with the governor and his wife and had 4 silent gas emissions. Then, while sitting in your waiting room, I had 5 silent gas emissions. Doctor, you've got to help me. What can we do? Well, Margaret, said the doctor, raising her voice, I think the first thing we're going to do is to give you a hearing test.
A general visits an army hospital to check on the conditions and inspire the troops. It's World War I, trench warfare is living hell, and the men could really use some inspiration. The general starts talking to the wounded soldiers. He goes up to the first man and says, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier replies, "Sir, I got dysentery in the trenches, something awful." The general asks him, "How are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my behind with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" And the soldier says, "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." The general seems satisfied, thanks him for his service and moves on to the next man. The general approaches the second man's bed and asks, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier replies somewhat embarrassed, "Sir, I got gonorrhea from a woman while I was on leave." The general laughs and says, "It happens to the best of us, son. How are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my privates with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" And the soldier says, "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." The general once again seems satisfied, thanks him for his service and moves on to the next man. The general approaches the third man's bed and asks, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier tells him, "Sir, I got strep throat in the trenches." The general asks, "How are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my throat with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" "Actually, sir, there is one thing," said the soldier. "I'd like to be the first one to use the brush."
An elderly gentleman had serious hearing problems for a number of years. He went to the doctor and the doctor was able to have him fitted for a set of hearing aids that allowed the gentleman to hear 100%. The elderly gentleman went back in a month to the doctor and the doctor said, "Your hearing is perfect. Your family must be really pleased that you can hear again." The gentleman replied, "Oh, I haven't told my family yet. I just sit around and listen to their conversations." "And do you know what?" "What?" asked the doctor. "I've changed my will 3 times.
A married couple was in a terrible accident where the man's face was severely burned. The doctor told the husband that they couldn't graft any skin from his body because he was too skinny. So the wife offered to donate some of her own skin. However, the only skin on her body that the doctor felt was suitable would have to come from her buttocks. The husband and wife agreed that they would tell no one about where the skin came from, and they requested that the doctor also honor their secret. After all, this was a delicate matter. After the surgery was completed, everyone was astounded at the man's new face. He looked more handsome than he ever had before. All his friends and relatives just went on and on about his youthful beauty. One day, he was alone with his wife, and he was overcome with emotion at her sacrifice. He said, "Dear, I just want to thank you for everything you did for me. How can I possibly repay you?" "My darling," she replied, "I get all the thanks I need every time I see your mother kiss you on the cheeks."
The other day, a gentleman went to the dentist's office to have a tooth pulled. The dentist pulls out a freezing needle to give him a shot. "No way. No needles. I hate needles," the man said. The dentist starts to hook up the laughing gas and the man immediately objected. I can't do the gas thing either. The thought of having the gas mask on is suffocating me. The dentist then asks the gentleman if he has any objection to taking a pill. No objection, the man said. I'm fine with pills. The dentist then returns and says, here's a Viagra tablet. The gentleman, totally at a loss for words, said in amazement, wow, I didn't know Viagra worked as a painkiller. It doesn't, said the dentist, but it will give you something to hold on to when I pull your tooth.
A happy 90-year-old man walked into the doctor's office. He was all smiles and laughed with the nurses and staff, until they brought him in to see the doctor. The doctor examined him and told him he should start eating better, because his health was not in that great a shape. The old man was surprised. He said to his doctor, I've never felt better. I have an 18-year-old bride who is pregnant with my child. What do you think about that? The doctor considered his question for a minute and then said, I have an elderly friend who is a hunter and never misses a season. One day when he was going out in a bit of a hurry, he accidentally picked up his umbrella instead of his gun. When he got to the creek, he saw a rabbit sitting beside the stream. He raised his umbrella and went, bang, bang, and the rabbit fell dead. What do you think of that? The 90-year-old said, I'd say somebody else killed that rabbit. The doctor smiled. My point exactly.
An elderly woman went into the pharmacy. When the pharmacist asked why she was there, she replied, I'd like to have some birth control pills. Taken aback, the pharmacist thought for a minute and then said, Excuse me, Mrs. Smith, but you're 75 years old. What possible use could you have for birth control pills? The woman responded, They help me sleep better. The pharmacist thought some more and continued, How in the world do birth control pills help you to sleep? The woman said, I put them in my granddaughter's orange juice and I sleep better at night.
Some have counseled me to go to a long-term care home. I was not sure about this. So I decided to ask my longtime doctor. So I awaited my next visit and I asked him, How do you determine whether or not an older person should be put in a long-term care home? Well, he said, we fill up a bathtub, then we offer a teaspoon, a teacup and a bucket to the person to empty the bathtub. Oh, I understand, I said. A normal person would use the bucket because it is bigger than the spoon or the teacup. No, he said. A normal person would pull the plug. Do you want a bed near the window? Are you going to pass this on? Or do you want the bed next to mine?
A man came to see his family doctor. The man told his doctor that he wasn't able to do all the things around the house that he used to do. When the examination was complete, he said, Now, doc, I can take it. Tell me in plain English what is wrong with me. Well, in plain English, the doctor replied, You're just lazy. Okay, said the man. Now give me the medical term so I can tell my wife.
I had the toughest time of my life. First, I got angina pectoris and then arteriosclerosis. Just as I was recovering from these, I got tuberculosis, double pneumonia and phthisis, then they gave me hypodermics. Appendicitis was followed by tonsillectomy. These gave way to aphasia and hypertrophic cirrhosis. I completely lost my memory for a while. I know I had diabetes and acute indigestion, besides gastritis, rheumatism, lumbago, and neuritis. I don't know how I pulled through it all. It was the hardest spelling test I've ever had.
A sweet grandmother telephoned St. Joseph's Hospital and she timidly asked, Is it possible to speak to someone who can tell me how a patient is doing? The operator responded, I'll be glad to help, dear. What's the patient's name and room number? The grandmother in her weak tremulous voice said, Norma Findlay, room 302. The operator replied, Let me place you on hold while I check with her nurse. After a few minutes, the operator returned to the phone. Oh, good news. Her nurse has told me that Norma is doing very well. Her blood pressure is fine, her blood work just came back as normal. And her physician, Dr. Cohen, has scheduled her to be discharged Tuesday. The grandmother said, "Thank you. That's wonderful. I was so worried. God bless you for the good news." The operator replied, "You're more than welcome. Is Norma your daughter?" The grandmother said, "No, I'm Norma Findlay in room 302. No one tells me anything."
A man goes to the doctor with a long history of migraine headaches. When the doctor goes over his history and does his physical, he discovers that the poor guy has tried practically every therapy known to man for his migraines and still sees no improvement. "Listen," says the doc, "I have migraines too, and the advice I'm going to give you isn't really anything I learned in medical school, but it's advice that I've gotten from my own experience. When I have a migraine, I go home, get in a nice hot bathtub, and soak for a while. Then I have my wife sponge me off with the hottest water I can stand, especially around the forehead. This helps a little. Then I get out of the tub, take her into the bedroom, and even if my head is killing me, I force myself to have sex with her. Almost always, the headache is immediately gone. Now give it a try, and come back and see me in 6 weeks." 6 weeks later, the patient returns with a big grin. "Doc, I took our advice and it works. It really works. I've had migraines for 17 years and this is the first time anyone has ever helped me." "Well," says the physician, "I'm glad I could help. By the way, Doc," the patient adds, "you have a really nice house."
A husband decides to join his wife for the first time playing golf. He's never really been into the game, but since his wife was playing with all these men around, he wanted to come and check it out. All day long he complains, about the heat, about the other people, about how long it's taking. They are on the 9th green when suddenly he collapses from a heart attack. "Help me," he groans to his wife. The wife calls 911 on her cell phone, talks for a few minutes, picks up her putter, and lines up her putt. Her husband raises his head off the green and stares at her. "I'm dying over here and you're putting?" "Don't worry, dear," says the wife calmly, "they found a doctor on the 2nd hole and he's coming to help you." "Well, how long will it take for him to get here?" he asks feebly. "No time at all," says his wife. "Everybody's already agreed to let him play through."
An elderly lady went to the doctor and asked for his help in reviving her husband's passion. "Why don't you give him Viagra?" the doctor asked. "Oh no," the woman replied. "He doesn't even take aspirin for a headache." "That's not a problem," the doctor told her. "Just crush up the pill and slip it into his coffee. He'll never even know." Several days later, the old woman returned to the doctor, and he asked her if his suggestions worked. "Oh, doctor!" she exclaimed. "It was horrible. I did just as you said, and as soon as he finished his coffee, he jumped up from the table, ripped off my clothes and took me right there on the table. We made love for a whole hour." "And that was horrible?" the doctor asked, puzzled. "Oh, the love-making was wonderful," the old woman exclaimed. "But I can never show my face in that coffee shop again."
The medics rushed Mr. Steinberg to the hospital in the middle of the night, apparently due to a massive heart attack. The doctors work on him all night and morning and finally discharge him to the intensive care unit, where therapy continues. After a couple of days, Mr. Steinberg's physician comes into his room and says, "Sol, I'm happy to tell you that you are completely well. You have the heart function that you did when you were a 15-year-old lad. We're going to send you home tomorrow. You don't have to worry about your heart, do any physical exercise that you like." Mr. Steinberg goes home and that evening is talking with his wife. "Doris, you'll never believe it. I'm completely well. I have no worries with my heart. Tonight, darling, you and I are going to make love like you've never had before, wild, passionate ***. You'll love it. Doris thinks for a minute and says, I don't know, Sol. I've heard about active intercourse and heart conditions. I don't want it to be on my conscience if you die while we are making love. Maybe, just maybe, if your doctor wrote a note to me saying that everything was okay, maybe I would have such *** with you. Mr. Steinberg was dejected, but the next day he was in his doctor's office. His doctor tells him, sure, Sol, no problem, I'll write the note. Let's see, here's my prescription pad. Mr. Sol Steinberg, a patient of mine, has the heart function of a 15-year-old lad, and can have mad, passionate, adventurous *** any time that he so desires, signed, Dr. Aaron Katz. Now, I'll just address this. By the way, Sol, what's your wife's first name? Doctor, could you just make that, to whom it may concern?
A beautiful young woman was about to undergo a minor operation. She was lying on a hospital trolley bed with nothing on, except a sheet over her. The nurse pushed her trolley down the corridor towards the operating theater, where she left the woman on the trolley outside, while she went in to check whether everything was ready. A young man wearing a white coat approached her, lifted the sheet up and started examining her naked body. He put the sheet back and then walked away and talked to another man in a white coat. A second man came over, lifted the sheet and performed the same examinations. When a third man did the same thing, yet even more carefully, she began to grow impatient and blurted out, All these examinations are fine and appreciated, but when are you going to start the operation? The man in the white coat shrugged. I have no idea. We're just painting the corridor.
A gynecologist was getting sick of his job and decided that he needed a career change. He'd always enjoyed tinkering with engines, so thought he'd become a mechanic. So he went along to mechanics school, and the final test was to strip the engine completely and reassemble it, obviously back into perfect working order. So our gynecologist friend did the test and anxiously awaited the result. The day he received the results, he got quite a surprise. He got 150%. He quickly phoned the instructor and queried the mark. The instructor said, No, that's right. First I gave you 50% for stripping down the engine, a very thorough job. Next I gave you 50% for reassembling it, a fantastic job really, and then I gave you a 50% bonus for doing it all through the muffler. A middle-aged woman seemed sheepish as she visited her gynecologist. Come now, coaxed the doctor, you've been seeing me for years. There's nothing you can't tell me. This one's kind of strange. Let me be the judge of that, the doctor replied. Well, she said, yesterday I went to the bathroom in the morning and heard a plink 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 in the toilet, and when I looked down, the water was full of pennies. I see. That afternoon I went again and there were nickels in the bowl. That night, she went on, there were dimes, and this morning there were quarters. You've got to tell me what's wrong with me, she implored. I'm scared out of my wits. The gynecologist put a comforting hand on her shoulder. There, it's nothing to be scared about. You're simply going through the change. A young doctor had moved out to a small community to replace a doctor who was retiring. The older doctor suggested the young one accompany him on his rounds so the community could become used to a new doctor. At the first house a woman complained, I've been a little sick to my stomach. The older doctor said, well, you've probably been overdoing the fresh fruit. Why don't you cut back on the amount you've been eating and see if that does the trick? As they left, the younger man said, you didn't even examine that woman. How'd you come to your diagnosis so quickly? I didn't have to. You noticed I dropped my stethoscope on the floor in there? When I bent over to pick it up, I noticed a half-dozen banana peels in the trash. That was what was probably making her sick. the younger doctor said, pretty clever. I think I'll try that at the next house. Arriving at the next house, they spent several minutes talking with a younger woman. She complained that she just didn't have the energy she once did. I'm feeling terribly run down lately. You've probably been doing too much extra work for the church, the younger doctor told her. Perhaps you should cut back a bit and see if that helps. As they left, the elder doc said, your diagnosis is almost certainly correct, but how did you arrive at it? Well, just like you did at the last house, I dropped my stethoscope and when I bent down to retrieve it, I noticed the preacher under the bed. The nurse asked the patient to remove his clothing and put on a gown, to be checked by a doctor. The nurse asked the patient to remove his clothing and put on a gown, to be checked by a doctor. In front of you? He asks, shyly. The nurse says, well no, but I've seen the human body before. The patient said, not one like mine. You would die laughing at my body. Of course, I won't laugh, said the nurse to the patient. I am a professional. In over 20 years, I have never laughed at a patient. Okay, then, said the patient and he proceeded to drop his trousers, revealing a huge male body with the smallest organ the nurse had ever seen in her life. In length and width, it was almost identical to a battery. Unable to control herself, the nurse tried to stop a giggle, but it just came out. And then she started laughing at the fact that she was laughing. Feeling very badly that she had laughed at the patients, she composed herself, as well as she could. I am so sorry, the nurse said. I do not know what came over to me. On my honor as a nurse and a lady, I promise that it won't happen again. Now tell me, what seems to be the problem? It's swollen, the patient replied.